Leora stood in the cold, dark cell, her eyes fixed on the grim, metal walls surrounding her. The Galactic Empire had thrown her into this prison as part of her punishment, and she could already feel the weight of their judgment upon her. She wasn't just any prisoner. Leora was a princess, and her crime was defying the Empire's oppressive rule. For years, she had fought against their domination, and now they had decided to make her an example. The cell was nothing more than a small, sterile room with a metal bed and a flickering light that barely lit up the corners. The air smelled of rust and decay, and the walls hummed with the low vibrations of the spaceship that carried her to an unknown planet. She had no idea where they were going, but she knew it didn't matter. This was a one-way journey. Her hands were shackled, but even the heavy chains couldn't suppress the fire inside her. She was a warrior, a leader. The people of her planet had trusted her, and now she would fight till the end, no matter how bleak her situation seemed. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside her cell. She glanced up just as the door slid open with a mechanical hiss. 2 guards, clad in black armor, entered the room, their faces hidden behind cold, emotionless helmets. One of them grabbed her by the arm and roughly pulled her to her feet. "You're being transferred," one of them said in a low, gravelly voice. Leora didn't resist. She couldn't afford to waste her energy. As they marched her down the narrow corridor, the harsh lighting above flickered and hummed, casting strange shadows on the walls. Her mind raced. She had heard rumors about human soldiers being stationed on remote planets. The Empire's punishment for rebellious aliens like herself often involved sending them to the humans, as if it was some sort of cruel irony. The guards led her into a small, sterile room where a single human soldier waited. He stood tall, his face covered by the typical dark visor of a soldier's helmet. The soldier's uniform was a mix of dark fabric and heavy armor plates, and his eyes were hidden from view. But Leora could feel the weight of his gaze, even though it was masked. This was the man who had been chosen to watch over her. This was her new fate. The guards roughly shoved her towards him. "This one's all yours," one of them said, almost mockingly. Leora met the soldier's gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. She would not be broken. Not by him. Not by anyone. The soldier stepped forward, his hand reaching out to secure the shackles on her wrists. His touch was surprisingly gentle, though it did nothing to ease the tension building in her chest. She could feel the heat of anger rising within her. He was just another tool of the Empire, a mere pawn in their game. She didn't care who he was. He was nothing to her. "Name's Adam," the soldier said, his voice surprisingly soft, though still stern. "You're coming with me." Leora said nothing, her chin raised in defiance. She had no intention of speaking to him, no desire to engage with this soldier who had been tasked with her humiliation. As Adam led her through the ship, the silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. Leora's mind raced with thoughts of escape. There had to be a way out. The humans weren't invincible. She had faced worse before, and she was no stranger to fighting for her survival. She had once led an army against the Empire, and she had made them bleed. But this time, it was different. This time, she was at the mercy of the very people she had fought against. She was vulnerable. But as they reached the airlock, something unexpected happened. Adam paused and looked down at her. For the briefest moment, his helmet shifted just enough to reveal his eyes. There was something in them. Something Leora hadn't expected to see. It wasn't the cold, indifferent gaze of a soldier. It wasn't the look of someone who had been conditioned to carry out orders without question. No, in his eyes, she saw something else. Was it sympathy? Was he truly that different from the others? The moment passed quickly, and Adam turned away, his gaze now focused on the path ahead. Leora pushed the thought from her mind. It didn't matter. She was here to survive, and nothing, no one, would stop her from doing that. The airlock doors opened with a hiss, revealing a massive hangar filled with transports. Adam led her to a small shuttle, where 2 more soldiers were waiting. They barely glanced at her as she was pushed inside. The doors closed with a heavy thud, and the shuttle took off, leaving the Imperial ship behind. Leora sat quietly, her mind still racing. She had no idea where they were headed, but she could feel the weight of her new reality pressing down on her. The humiliation, the fear, the uncertainty. It was all-consuming, but she would not let it break her. Not now. Not ever. As the shuttle hurtled through space, Leora's thoughts returned to the soldier who had led her to this point. Adam. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. He was different, but that didn't change anything. She was still a prisoner. And in the end, he would be nothing more than the man who would serve as her captor. But in the silence of the shuttle, as she glanced out at the stars streaking past, Leora made a silent vow to herself. She would not let her story end this way. She would find a way to fight back. The Empire would learn that even the strongest chains could not bind her forever. And the human soldier, he would soon learn that underestimating her would be his greatest mistake. The shuttle shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of a new world, a place Leora could only guess about. The unknown planet had been nothing but a blur through the viewports as they descended. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the engines and the soft breathing of the soldiers around her. Leora remained still, her eyes focused on the stars outside, her thoughts a whirlwind of frustration and fear. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, and the doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. Cold, fresh air poured in, carrying the scent of unfamiliar plants and earth. The sound of distant winds howled as Leora was escorted out of the shuttle, her movements stiff and cautious. She was led down a narrow metal ramp and into a wide, barren landscape. She couldn't tell where they were, what sort of planet this was. The ground beneath her feet was rocky, but the air felt somehow clean. It was strange to be outside again after so many days trapped in the cold, dim light of the Imperial ship. She breathed deeply, taking in the unfamiliar atmosphere, but it didn't ease the fear building inside her. Adam, the human soldier, walked by her side, his heavy boots crunching on the rocky ground. His presence was a constant reminder of her reality, and yet something about him made her uneasy in a way she hadn't anticipated. There was no harshness in the way he walked or in the way he held his weapon. He was focused, but not as if he was prepared for a fight. He seemed thoughtful, almost as if he was caught between duty and something else she couldn't understand. The landscape around them was mostly flat, dotted with sparse vegetation and distant hills. But as they walked, Leora noticed the oddness of it all, the emptiness of the planet. It felt deserted, as though this place wasn't inhabited by anyone at all. Was it a prison world? Were there more soldiers here? The soldiers who had brought her here soon left, returning to the shuttle and leaving Leora alone with Adam. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the wind picking up and carrying dust across the land. Leora kept her head high, determined not to show weakness, but something in the air felt different here, and as the silence stretched on, it became harder to ignore. Adam turned to face her, his eyes narrowing beneath his helmet. His voice, when it came, was soft but firm. "You're not like the others." Leora froze, her heart racing in her chest. The others, the other prisoners, the other rebels, what did he mean? She didn't answer, unsure of whether she should trust him. You're not what they said you would be," Adam continued, his voice strangely gentle. "I was told you were a threat, dangerous, a rebel. But you're just a woman." Leora's fists clenched at her sides. She had been labeled as a threat by the Empire for so long that she had come to expect nothing but disdain from those who crossed her path. But this soldier, this human, was different. He was looking at her, really looking at her, as though he was trying to understand. "You don't look like the monster they told me about," Adam added. "You don't seem like a killer." Leora met his gaze, her eyes narrowing. "And what makes you think you know anything about me? You've been told to keep me captive, to break me. Just do your job." Adam's expression shifted slightly. There was no anger in his eyes, no cruelty. There was only curiosity, compassion. It was strange, this feeling she couldn't quite place. She had never been treated this way, not by anyone from the Empire. To them, she was nothing more than a pawn, an enemy to be eliminated or subdued. He lowered his gaze, as if considering his next words carefully. "I'm not here to break you. I'm here to make sure you don't escape." He paused, as though searching for the right words. "But I'm also here because I don't believe in everything the Empire stands for. I'm not like the others." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lyora stared at him, unsure of how to respond. How could he say that? How could a soldier of the Galactic Empire possibly believe that? The Empire had destroyed everything she had ever fought for, everything she had once believed in. The same Empire that had turned her into a prisoner. "You're a soldier," she said, her voice cold and steady, despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "A tool of the Empire. How can you claim to be different from them?" Adam's shoulders sagged slightly, and he let out a quiet sigh. "I didn't choose this life. I didn't choose to fight for them. But when you're born into a system like this, there's no easy way out. I didn't have a choice, Lyora. But maybe, just maybe, I have a choice now." Her heart skipped a beat at the mention of her name. It wasn't just a label or a title anymore. It was a person, a woman who had lived, fought, and survived. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled around them, stirring the dust and rocks at their feet. Lyora's mind raced, torn between the reality of her imprisonment and the flicker of hope she hadn't dared to acknowledge. Could there really be someone on the other side of the Empire's machine who saw her as more than just an enemy? "Don't trust me just yet," Adam said quietly, breaking the silence. "But I'll do my best to make sure you're treated fairly." Lyora didn't know what to make of his words. Fairly? She had never known fairness in her life. But for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to dismiss the sincerity in his voice. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, Lyora felt the faintest stirrings of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was a dangerous thing, a fragile thing. But it was there, just out of reach, like a distant star. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. Days passed, each one blending into the next. Lyora's routine remained the same, waking up in a cold, barren room, with only the sound of distant winds to break the silence. She was guarded at all times, watched closely by the soldiers of the Empire. But even in this prison-like existence, she found her mind wandering back to Adam. There was something about him that made her uneasy, but not in the way she was accustomed to. She had always expected people to treat her with fear or hatred, to view her as nothing more than an enemy. Yet, Adam treated her differently. His actions were always calculated, but there was a strange kindness behind his eyes. And every time their paths crossed, she couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. At first, she tried to keep her distance, to remain cold and detached. It was easier that way, but it was harder to ignore the small gestures, his attempts at conversation, his quiet presence whenever the other soldiers were around. He never forced anything on her, never pressured her to talk or to change, but there was something about his steady patience that tugged at her, something that slowly started to shift her perspective. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adam approached her once again. He was carrying a small tray with what appeared to be food, though it was far from the lavish meals she had grown accustomed to before her capture. The simple, plain food looked unappetizing, but the fact that he was offering it to her meant something more than just sustenance. "Here," Adam said, his voice soft. "I know you're probably not hungry, but I thought you might want something." Lyora hesitated, staring at the food in his hand. It wasn't much, just a few pieces of bread and some dried meat, but it was the thought that mattered. She had been fed, of course, but never with any care. It had always been a cold, impersonal thing. This, however, felt different. For a moment, Lyora said nothing. She wasn't sure if she could trust this man, or if this act of kindness was just another manipulation. But she couldn't deny the pang of hunger in her stomach. Finally, she took the tray, her fingers brushing lightly against his. "Thank you," she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't meet his gaze, unsure of what this moment meant. Adam nodded, his expression unchanged. "You're welcome. You've been through a lot. I can't even imagine what it's like to be in your position." Leora sat down, her mind racing as she picked at the food. There was something about the way Adam spoke, something that felt genuine. She couldn't understand it. Why would a soldier, especially one loyal to the Empire, care about her? He was the enemy. He had been trained to capture, subdue, and control her. Yet here he was, offering food, offering kindness. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, though. In fact, it was a silence she had grown to appreciate. The days spent in isolation, with nothing but the sound of her own thoughts, had made her feel like a ghost. But with Adam around, even if he said nothing, she didn't feel so alone. After a while, Adam spoke again. "I've been reading some of the records about your people, Leora. You're not what they say you are. I mean, they say a lot of things about your species, but I don't know. It doesn't seem right." Leora looked up at him, surprised by his words. "You've been reading. What about?" "About your past, your culture," he said. "I wanted to understand you better, to know why you fight." The thought of someone taking an interest in her people, her history, was almost too much to bear. It had been so long since anyone had cared to understand. The Empire had tried to erase everything about her species, reducing them to nothing more than a footnote in the grand scheme of things. The thought that Adam, of all people, was making the effort to learn, it stirred something deep inside her. "My people fight because they have no choice," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with the weight of everything she had lost. "The Empire destroyed everything we had, our homes, our families, our way of life. We fight because we're the last ones left, and we can't let them take any more." Adam nodded, his face serious. "I understand that now. I didn't before, but I do now. I don't know what I can do to help, but if there's anything I can do, just let me know." Leora's eyes softened, but only for a brief moment. She quickly looked away, focusing on the small piece of bread in her hands. There was something raw and vulnerable in his eyes that unsettled her. She had spent so long fighting for survival, for her people, that she had forgotten what it felt like to hope for something more. Adam's words were kind, but she couldn't let herself be fooled. He was still the enemy, even if he didn't fully understand that yet. "You can't help," she muttered, her tone colder now. "You're a soldier. You're just following orders." Adam didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat down beside her, his posture relaxed but alert. "I am a soldier," he said slowly. "But I don't follow orders blindly. Not anymore." Leora turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean by that?" "I've seen the way the Empire treats people," Adam said, "and I can't ignore it anymore. Maybe I can't change the whole system, but I can make a difference in your life, even if it's small." For the first time, Leora truly studied him, searching his face for any signs of deceit. She found none. There was only a quiet resolve in his expression, and in that moment, Leora realized that maybe, just maybe, she had found an ally where she least expected it. The days passed, and though they spoke less and less, a quiet understanding had formed between them. It wasn't a friendship, not yet, but it was something else, something that, for the first time in years, made Leora wonder if she could survive this. And so, in the quiet solitude of her captivity, Leora and Adam began to form an unlikely bond, one born out of shared pain, but also a glimmer of something far more powerful, the possibility of change. Leora woke up to the sound of metal clanging outside her cell, a harsh reminder that her captivity was never far from her mind. Yet, today was different. There was something in the air, an undercurrent of tension she couldn't ignore. She could feel it in the way the guards moved with more urgency, the way their voices dropped low in conversation, as if they were hiding something. It was almost as though they were preparing for something, preparing for a storm. For a moment, Leora said nothing. She wasn't sure if she could trust this man, or if this act of kindness was just another manipulation. But she couldn't deny the pang of hunger in her stomach. Finally, she took the tray, her fingers brushing lightly against his. "Thank you," she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't meet his gaze, unsure of what this moment meant. Adam nodded, his expression unchanged. "You're welcome. You've been through a lot. I can't even imagine what it's like to be in your position." Leora sat down, her mind racing as she picked at the food. There was something about the way Adam spoke, something that felt genuine. She couldn't understand it. Why would a soldier, especially one loyal to the Empire, care about her? He was the enemy. He had been trained to capture, subdue, and control her. Yet here he was, offering food, offering kindness. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, though. In fact, it was a silence she had grown to appreciate. The days spent in isolation, with nothing but the sound of her own thoughts, had made her feel like a ghost. But with Adam around, even if he said nothing, she didn't feel so alone. After a while, Adam spoke again. "I've been reading some of the records about your people, Leora. You're not what they say you are. I mean, they say a lot of things about your species, but I don't know. It doesn't seem right." Leora looked up at him, surprised by his words. "You've been reading. What about?" "About your past, your culture," he said. "I wanted to understand you better, to know why you fight." The thought of someone taking an interest in her people, her history, was almost too much to bear. It had been so long since anyone had cared to understand. The Empire had tried to erase everything about her species, reducing them to nothing more than a footnote in the grand scheme of things. The thought that Adam, of all people, was making the effort to learn, it stirred something deep inside her. "My people fight because they have no choice," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with the weight of everything she had lost. "The Empire destroyed everything we had. Our homes, our families, our way of life. We fight because we're the last ones left, and we can't let them take any more." Adam nodded, his face serious. "I understand that now. I didn't before, but I do now. I don't know what I can do to help, but if there's anything I can do, just let me know." Leora's eyes softened, but only for a brief moment. She quickly looked away, focusing on the small piece of bread in her hands. There was something raw and vulnerable in his eyes that unsettled her. She had spent so long fighting for survival, for her people, that she had forgotten what it felt like to hope for something more. Adam's words were kind, but she couldn't let herself be fooled. He was still the enemy, even if he didn't fully understand that yet. "You can't help," she muttered, her tone colder now. "You're a soldier, you're just following orders." Adam didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat down beside her, his posture relaxed but alert. "I am a soldier," he said slowly. "But I don't follow orders blindly. Not anymore." Leora turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean by that?" "I've seen the way the Empire treats people," Adam said, "and I can't ignore it anymore. Maybe I can't change the whole system, but I can make a difference in your life, even if it's small." For the first time, Leora truly studied him, searching his face for any signs of deceit. She found none. There was only a quiet resolve in his expression. And in that moment, Leora realized that maybe, just maybe, she had found an ally where she least expected it. The days passed, and though they spoke less and less, a quiet understanding had formed between them. It wasn't a friendship, not yet, but it was something else, something that, for the first time in years, made Leora wonder if she could survive this. And so, in the quiet solitude of her captivity, Leora and Adam began to form an unlikely bond. One born out of shared pain, but also a glimmer of something far more powerful, the possibility of change. Leora woke up to the sound of metal clanging outside her cell, a harsh reminder that her captivity was never far from her mind. Yet, today was different. There was something in the air, an undercurrent of tension she couldn't ignore. She could feel it in the way the guards moved with more urgency, the way their voices dropped low in conversation, as if they were hiding something. It was almost as though they were preparing for something, preparing for a storm. Adam had been different too. Over the past few days, his presence had become more constant, more purposeful. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a man with a mission. And though she didn't fully understand what that mission was, she knew it had something to do with the growing whispers of rebellion that had started to surface in the Empire. When he came to her cell that day, his face was serious, his eyes betraying a storm of thoughts he was clearly holding back. "Leora, we need to talk," he said, his voice low, but firm. She met his gaze, unsure of what he meant. There was a certain urgency to his tone, a feeling she hadn't sensed from him before. "I'm listening," she replied, her own voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "I've been working with a small group of soldiers," Adam continued, pacing back and forth. "We're trying to stop what the Empire is doing, trying to stop the endless cycle of violence. And I need your help." Leora frowned, uncertain. "Help? What do you want me to do? I'm just a prisoner. How could I possibly help?" Adam stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes full of determination. "You're more than just a prisoner, Leora. You've seen what the Empire is capable of. You've fought for your people. You know their weaknesses. That's what we need. We need someone who understands the Empire's methods, someone who knows how to outsmart them. Someone like you." Her heart raced at his words, a mix of doubt and curiosity swirling inside her. She had spent so long fighting against the Empire, had seen so much destruction, that the idea of fighting alongside a soldier, someone who had once been her enemy, seemed almost impossible. But Adam wasn't like the other soldiers. She had seen it in the way he treated her, in the way he spoke about the Empire. He wasn't a blind follower. And if there was one thing Leora understood, it was that not all battles were fought with weapons alone. Sometimes, it was the heart, the will to do what was right, that made all the difference. "I don't trust you," she said finally, her voice harsh, but not without a trace of vulnerability. "I don't trust your kind. I've seen too much destruction. I've seen what the Empire can do to people." Adam's eyes softened. I know you don't trust me, but trust me on this. This isn't about sides anymore. This is about stopping the Empire from hurting any more people. This is about saving what's left of our world, your world, our world." For a long moment, Leora said nothing. Her mind raced, thoughts clashing like thunder in her head. She had always fought alone, driven by her hatred for the Empire, driven by the need for revenge. But here was Adam, offering her something she hadn't even known she needed. A chance to fight for something bigger than herself, something more meaningful than her personal pain. And then, without a word, she nodded. "I'm in," she said, her voice quieter than before. But there was a steel in it now, a strength that she hadn't known she had until this moment. Adam's face broke into a rare smile, the first real smile she had seen from him in days. "Thank you," he said. "I know this isn't easy, but we have a chance. We have a chance to end this." Adam led her to a hidden chamber beneath the base, where a small group of soldiers were gathered. They were quiet, their faces grim, but there was an energy in the room, a quiet intensity. Leora could feel it. This wasn't just a meeting. This was the beginning of something much larger. As she entered, all eyes turned to her. She could sense their doubt, their uncertainty. After all, she had been the enemy, the one they had been trained to fight. But Adam's presence in the room had an undeniable power. When he spoke, they listened. "This is Leora," Adam said, his voice steady. "She's going to help us. She knows the Empire better than any of us, and we need that knowledge." Leora stood tall, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I know the Empire's weaknesses. I know where they keep their weapons, where their supply lines run. I know how they move." She looked around at the soldiers. "And I know what it feels like to be crushed under their boot. I know how it feels to have everything taken from you." A silence fell over the room. Slowly, one by one, the soldiers nodded. Some still looked at her with suspicion, but most of them simply looked resigned. They had all been hurt in some way by the Empire, and now they were being offered a chance to fight back. Adam turned to her, his expression serious once again. "The plan is simple," he said. "We hit them where it hurts. We take out their weapons supply first. Without that, they'll be vulnerable. But we need to move fast, and we need to be smart. They won't hesitate to retaliate. We'll make it through this, Leora," he said, his voice low, almost as if he were trying to convince himself more than her. "I know," she whispered back, her heart aching. "We'll fight for each other." But deep down, Leora could feel the distance growing between them. There were moments when Adam would look at her with such intensity, and then, in the blink of an eye, his focus would shift, and he would be lost in his thoughts again. It was as if the man she had come to trust, the one she had fought beside, was slipping away from her. The following night, under the cover of darkness, they made their move. The group of rebels, including Adam and Leora, crept through the shadows, avoiding the Empire's patrols. They had a single goal, the central base. It was the Empire's fortress, and it was said to be impenetrable, but they had learned its weaknesses, and they had a plan. They reached the outer walls just before dawn, the first light of morning starting to paint the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The silence was deafening. Leora's heart pounded in her chest as she surveyed the area, knowing that one wrong move could cost them everything. Adam was at the front, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the sharp focus of a predator. "We're almost there," he whispered to Leora, giving her a brief look. For the first time in days, she saw a flicker of something more in his eyes, something like hope, mixed with fear. They infiltrated the base with surprising ease, slipping past guards and using the Empire's own technology to their advantage. But as they reached the core of the facility, something unexpected happened. A signal was sent out, a warning, a call for backup. The Empire knew they were there. "Get ready," Adam whispered urgently, his grip tightening on his weapon. But just as they were about to proceed, something happened that Leora never expected. She saw it before anyone else. One of the soldiers, a man she had trusted, stepped forward from the shadows. "It's too late," he said coldly, his voice carrying an ominous tone. "The Empire already knew you were coming. It was all a trap." Leora's heart sank as she realized the truth. Adam had known all along. He had led them into this trap. The rebellion, the fight, it had all been part of his plan. But why? Why had he betrayed them? "You knew," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You knew, and you still brought us here." Adam turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I had no choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Empire, they promised me everything. Power, control, the freedom to stop the war. I had to make a choice, Leora." And in that moment, Leora understood. Adam had never been the man she thought he was. He had used her, used the rebellion, all to secure his own future. The love she had believed was growing between them, the trust she had placed in him, it had all been a lie. As the sound of reinforcements echoed through the halls, Leora stood there, broken. The battle they had fought for was now lost, and the man she had thought she could trust had betrayed them all. And yet, even as the walls closed in around them, a part of her still couldn't let go of the hope that somewhere inside him, there was still a man worth saving. But that hope was fading fast. The battle had raged for what felt like hours, but in the end, it was the unexpected bravery of the rebel forces that turned the tide. Leora's heart pounded as she watched Adam, standing at the front, his face a mask of determination, leading the charge against the Empire's last line of defense. Despite the weight of betrayal that still lingered between them, she couldn't deny the strength in his resolve, the power of his will. He had made choices, horrible, selfish choices, but the man she once knew was still there, fighting with everything he had. It was the only thing that kept her from turning away in anger. The Empire's forces had underestimated them. They thought the rebellion was weak, fragile, a group of scattered warriors with no chance against the might of the Empire. But they were wrong. Under the cover of night, they had infiltrated the core of the central base, and now, with the Empire's reinforcements in retreat, they were on the verge of victory. "I've been thinking," Adam said quietly, "about us. About everything. I know I can't change the past, but I want to build a future. With you." Leora looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. She had never imagined that things could come full circle, that she would find herself standing here with him after everything they had been through. But here they were, both standing on the edge of a new beginning. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said softly. "But maybe we can try. Maybe we can see where this goes." Adam smiled, a soft, genuine smile that lit up his face for the first time in what felt like ages. "I'm willing to wait, Leora. I'll wait for as long as it takes." And as the stars twinkled overhead, Leora felt a flicker of hope in her heart. It was a small thing, a fragile thing, but it was enough. They had both been broken, and perhaps they would never be the same. But together, they could create something new, something worth fighting for, a future. And as Adam took her hand, Leora finally allowed herself to believe in that future. A future where they weren't just survivors of the Empire's destruction, but partners in the rebuilding of a new galaxy, a galaxy where love and trust could thrive once again.